Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this talk. My name is Johannes H. I'm a postdoctoral research associate with the University of Colorado, and I'm a geographic information scientist interested in human settlements, patterns, and long-term urbanization dynamics. This is collaborative research with the University of Southern California. My talk's entitled The Spatio-Temporal Evolution of City-Street Networks is that important. So road networks from a geographic perspective generally reflect human settlement patterns. At a more regional scale, they reflect urbanization dynamics, and they're also related to social and environmental components of urban systems and the built environment, such as issues of congestion, of pollution, and accessibility. So detailed knowledge on the long-term road network evolution helps us to better understand the dynamics of human nature, coupled systems, um, but also helps us to improve urban and regional planning uh, for more informed decision making, for the mitigation of social environmental issues, and ultimately to make our future cities more sustainable, more resilient, and more efficient. However, the problem is that multi-temporal road network data is very, very sparse, is rarely available, um, not even in data-rich countries such as the US or European countries. However, novel data sources such as cadastral data, tax assessment data, building stock database, but also remote sensing data and historical maps um, can be used can be integrated using suitable data integration strategies with contemporary road network data, for example, from OpenStreetMap, that allow for reconstructing historical road networks. And we did such a reconstruction for the US and conducted a long-term quantitative analysis of road network characteristics in the US from 1900 to 2015. So what's the data that we used? We used the historical settlement data compilation for the US, short HISTAC US, which is a multi-temporal human settlement data set derived from Zillow's ZTrax property database, so basically from an industry generated or industry assembled um, data set derived from cadastral parcel data. Um, and HISTAC US basically maps built-up areas and building densities from 1810 to 2015 at a very fine spatial grain at a resolution of 250 by 250 meters. You can see here for the Philadelphia, DC region in beige and green are historical or old parts of the built environment, whereas blue is more recently developed land. Interesting thing about these data is that it not only gives us insight into the urbanization dynamics in urban cores, but also in smaller cities and even in rural areas, as you can see here. So the method that we use is we use these historical building density surfaces from HISTEC US, as you can see in the top row, and first spatially generalize them by applying some focal density functions, some thresholding to get these generalized delineations of urban cores of built up areas, as you can see in the center row. And then we use the contemporary road network data from the National Transportation Data Set to spatially constrain the road network to these historical built-up areas. This is our approach to reconstruct the historical road networks and can basically assign an age estimate to each edge of the road network, so to each street, basically. You can see to the left. We can also consider this as a growing spatiotemporal network consisting of local streets, as you can see on the right-hand side here shown for Atlanta. from 1900 to 2015. So we're not taking into account highways in this analysis. It's just based on local streets. The study area is the US. Um, we use score-based statistical areas from the US Census Bureau, which delineates more than 800 metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas. So it basically delineates um, the urban centers of the country based on commuting patterns. So it includes the urban cores and also peri-urban areas where we expect the urban growth and urban sprawl to happen. The statistical analysis that we did, we derived road network metrics at different spatial levels. A few measures I'd like to briefly introduce here. So we use the average nodal degree. We use road density, so kilometer road per square kilometer built up area. Um, we also use the variety of road segment azimuths, so basically a measure of heterogeneity of the orientation of roads and of the road network within a given spatial unit. And we introduce a novel metric that we designed inspired by the clustering coefficient commonly used in network analysis, which we call local griddedness, which is basically the number of 4 cycles touching a node versus the degree of a node. And as you can see here in the upper right, this metric assigns a high value to a node that is in a perfect grid and medium and lower values to the nodes in these two examples given up here. So we calculated these metrics and others within each 1 by 1 kilometer grid cell. So we call these localized road network metrics because they describe the road network in this localized neighborhood of a kilometer by kilometer. And then, since we also know the age of each grid cell from our historical settlement data, we conducted a correlation analysis for each city. So we ask how correlated are road network metrics with road age. We also established time series of these metrics for each city, taking the average of all grid cells within a city and conducted time series clustering using TSK means. How these gridded surfaces of localized road network metrics look like. What you can see here in the left column is our historical settlement data. So basically the age of each grid cell of the built environment of the built up areas. So blue areas are old historical areas. And if you look in these 4 columns, you can basically see these surfaces for these different road network metrics. And as you can see, for example, if you look at the mean degree here, high values are expected to be encountered here in older parts of the city. So there seem to be quite strong relationships between age and these metrics, as you can already tell from these visualizations. The results of the correlation analysis, so these metrics was road age for each city based on the grid cells within each city. We visualized the distributions of Spearman's correlation coefficients for all 800 cities, basically. And you can observe very different levels of correlations of these metrics with road age. For example, if you look up here, a rather negative correlation with age are found for the dead end rate, so the number or the ratio proportion of nodes that represent dead ends. But also the azimuth variety is rather negatively correlated. So this tells us basically the newer the roads, the higher the proportion of dead ends, the higher the proportion of curved roads, or the higher the variety of road orientations within a given spatial unit. Whereas if you look down here, you can see rather positive correlations with road age are found for road density and mean degree. So that basically tells us the older the roads are, the higher the average degree, the higher the density, the higher the griddedness of the road network. Um, and if you look at the same visualization for the micropolitan CBSA, so small urban centers in the US, we pretty much observe a very similar pattern. So this is something that seems to be independent from the absolute size of a city. Now, if you look at the distribution, the geographic distributions of these correlation coefficients, um, we can observe pretty strong spatial patterns. If we look at this map here, so the correlation of azimuth variety with road age, we can see highly negative correlated area, high negative correlations are found here, for example. So the newer the roads, the more variety of road orientations here, whereas up in the northeast, um, it's pretty much the opposite. So the older the roads, the more variety of road orientations. And then we have this stretch here where we have weak positive uh, correlations. Similarly, local griddedness, um, high positive correlation is mostly found here in the center of the country. The older the roads, the more grid-like they are. Um, so we see these strong spatial patterns of correlation with age. The time series clustering results, we found an optimum k, so an optimum number of clusters for a k of 4 for these two variables. Um, and we also see strong spatial patterns. Interesting is that azimuth variety increases over time for most clusters, but then there's this yellow cluster where it actually slightly decreases, and this is found here in the northeast and the eastern part of the country, and which is in line with the previous uh, correlation analysis. If you look at the local griddedness, we see it decreases in all clusters, um, but then there is one cluster, the blue cluster, with a very sharp decline in local griddedness over time, which is mostly found here in the center of the country. There is also a second cluster, 3, which where the local griddness is pretty much invariant or constant over time. So this is another interesting observation here. Concludingly, we can say that novel data sources such as the HISTEC US and their integration with contemporary road network data alongside with data-driven statistical analysis reveals long-term trajectories of urban street networks plus their geographic variability within the United States. Our results are largely in agreement with existing work, but reveal finer detail. And future work will include a more sophisticated statistical analysis of these growing spatio-temporal networks using, for example, multivariate time series clustering. We also want to include intercity roads such as interstates, highways, and county roads, and also apply these methods in other countries. References. Thank you for your attention and looking forward to hearing your questions.